thank you for highlighting 4,000 Mondays. Yes, I did call my business that because of the research that I have done and continue to do and the work that I do. The idea that if we can tap into this thing, it's called temporal scarcity. And it's the idea that whenever we look at something that we think is valuable and we look at it as, oh no, it's going to come to an end, the perception of value we have for it soars through the roof, right? So if we apply that to our lives, which we can absolutely do, I think what it does is it shifts us from this sort of mundane, take for granted, everyday existence that we go through, which is really just the experience of being alive for most of us, right? We get into autopilot. We find ourselves sort of stuck in these grooves. And I've always liked the line that the only difference between a rut and a grave are the dimensions, And so when we find ourselves in ruts and when we find ourselves taking life for granted, that's the perfect opportunity to wake up and say, wait a minute, this thing ain't going to last forever. And so I get a little crazy and I like to quantify it. And I say, well, if we have 4,000 weeks on average, how many do we have left? And could that be the thing that wakes us up to say, let's take this thing seriously?
What's going on, guys? It's Yahavy David St. Clair Speaks, and you are now tuned in to the St. Clair Speaks Show.
You are now tuned in to the St. Clair Speaks Show.
Welcome back to the St. Clair Speaks Show podcast. I'm your host, Yahavy St. Clair. Now, as you could tell, you can probably feel my aura already, right? I am moving with intention and purpose. Today is going to be a really good episode because we have a guest that just brings it all together, just reminds us of moving with intention, living within your purpose. And when you live in your purpose, it shows. So super excited to have Jodi Wellman on the St. Clair Speaks Show podcast today. For those of you that don't know, let me give you the breakdown. Jodi Wellman is a speaker and facilitator. She named her business 4,000 Mondays. I get really excited. I'm sorry, guys. I get really excited about this. But the name of her business is 4,000 Mondays because it shines the light on the infinite number of weeks that we have to live and live life with intention. So super excited about that. But also, Jodi holds a master's degree in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. And she's also has been an assistant instructor and a certified coach with 25 years of corporate leadership experience and training. She's helped executives and teams and high performers work to become the best version of themselves. As you could tell, I'm very happy, really excited about this, as you should too. So one thing I would definitely say before I bring Jodi on is lean into this episode, lean into it, open ears, open mind. With that being said, Jodi, welcome to the St. Clair Speaks Show podcast. Please give our listeners a 3 to 5 minute introduction on yourself, your brand, your business, and tell us all about 4,000 Mondays because I was so excited I was fumbling about it.
Oh, Yahavy, I love your enthusiasm. And I have to say, we're kindred spirits because there are not as many people out there in this world who are as excited by the idea of how temporary we are as a motivator to live life fully. So I am feeding off your excitement. I think we're probably just going to reverberate our excitement in a very non-morbid way. How's that?
It's going to be really good.
Yeah. Well, thank you for highlighting 4,000 Mondays. Yes, I did call my business that because of the research that I have done and continue to do and the work that I do. The idea that if we can tap into this thing, it's called temporal scarcity. And it's the idea that whenever we look at something that we think is valuable and we look at it as, oh no, it's going to come to an end, the perception of value we have for it soars through the roof, right? So if we apply that to our lives, which we can absolutely do, I think what it does is it shifts us from this sort of mundane, take for granted, everyday existence that we go through, which is really just the experience of being alive for most of us, right? We get into autopilot. We find ourselves sort of stuck in these grooves. And I've always liked the line that the only difference between a rut and a grave are the dimensions, And so when we find ourselves in ruts and when we find ourselves taking life for granted, that's the perfect opportunity to wake up and say, wait a minute, this thing ain't going to last forever. And so I get a little crazy and I like to quantify it. And I say, well, if we have 4,000 weeks on average, how many do we have left? And could that be the thing that wakes us up to say, like, let's take this thing seriously. Like, let me do the things that I've been longing to do. Let me live the way I've been longing to live. Let me move forward with, I can't say no fear because that's just not possible, but with less fear to do it anyway. So the idea of counting down our Mondays is based in this idea that, you know what? We value things more when we know that they're not going to be around forever. Yeah.
Let's dive right into it. I've got to roll up my sleeves, mentally roll up my sleeves right now. The reality is there are some people that won't even reach 4,000 Mondays, right? So life is, we all know life is too short, right? Life is very short. At one point in time, this could happen to you, that could happen to you. But my question for you, how did you get to this point of just looking at this from, okay, it's what you do with your time on earth from the year you were born, that dash time in between, right? What made you niche down in that?
What a good question. I've always been interested just in general in the topic of death, not, not in a super gothy way, but just in this idea about the absurdity of it all, right? That, I mean, really, we've all had the moment where we've stopped and said, we're walking around and we're caring so much about that last email, that the tone was weird, or that I have this deadline, or that, I'm trying to lose 3 pounds. And at the end of the day, we're only here for a certain amount of time. And then when you look at it and you look up at the stars, or you're looking out at the ocean and you look at the specks of sand and you go, what's the deal? What's the point? Like, why do I care about the email? Why do I care about the pound or two? Like, so I've always been very fascinated by the point of it all, the purpose of it all. And then I think it took an elevated level. My mom died in her late 50s, and she died with what I see as a bunch of regrets about activities that she didn't go after, business opportunities. She lacked the confidence. And to be really honest, I saw a lot of that in myself. Sometimes I do let fear rule, and I have ideas and I think, oh no, I'm afraid of failure or rejection, or, insert here, fear of the day. And I thought, whoa, I don't want to get to my end in fear that I left a lot of opportunities on the table that I didn't go after, that I could have, that I should have. And so it really did wake me up to this idea that life is available to us, and we can make what we want of it. We can squander it. And I've done a good job of that too. And we can be intentional and say, wait a sec, if I have 1,902 Mondays left, which happens to be the case, and oh my goodness, Yahavy, I love how you went there right away and said, we might not get that many. I'd love to go there with you in a sec. Her abrupt ending, and in a way where it wasn't even like she ended it in a way that she could say, man, I lived this life super well right to the end. Like there's a quote, Randy Pouch, I think I'm saying his name wrong, probably am. He was a professor, I think at Columbia, and his whole point was, talking about making your life worthwhile. And I'm actually going to shift gears now, and I think I'll give another quote. I'm thinking about it. It's more of I think it's a Mark Twain quote. The idea that the pursuit of dying so that even the undertaker will be sorry when they bury you. Like, man, this was a life well lived. So igniting the idea of how to live a life well. So that's why I got into positive psychology. That's why I pursued my graduate studies in that, to say, how do we live life as best as possible? And so my twist on it is, you got to make it scarce, because that's what makes us take it seriously.
Okay. All right. Well, staying on this topic, I think for me, and I think other people could relate to this, the last 2 years, especially, right? The entire world shut down, COVID, a lot of people passed away, right? A lot of people died unexpectedly, right? I lost a couple of people, and some was either related to COVID or non-related stuff. And I'm like, yo, what, like what's going on, right? But it also reminded me, I'm like, man, but I'm still here, right? I have this purpose. And I recently had this, and this is why I'm so excited to talk to you today. I'm like, yo, who's making me do this? And I've noticed it, like we put this unnecessary pressure on ourselves to commit to things and saying yes. And I've realized I don't need to say yes to every opportunity that comes up, right? There's some opportunities I actually need to pass on, right? Start putting me in my own schedule and kind of like just being intentional. But swinging back to not everyone gets 4,000 Mondays.
Yeah.
It's the reality. Some people die tragically, right? It's unfortunate, but I don't know. I don't know. Take it from there, Jodi, because I'm thinking about a million things right now.
Yeah, there are so many directions, and I love what
Yeah.
the points you've already brought up that we could expand on. So this idea that we're lucky if we get 4,000, and many will get many more. I think my grandmother died at 103, so I'd love to have her side of the genes rather than my mother's side dying early. But when I do this exercise with people and when I'm in, say a speaking engagement, and I get people to calculate their Mondays, I literally get them doing mathematics. And most people have a perception of that's not enough time left. But every now and then, some people think, you know what, that's actually pretty great. I've got 2,500. That's a lot of time to do what I want to do. And it reminds me of the adage that many people have, which is where they will save their money and save their time so that when they retire, that's going to be their time to shine. And, the number of times we've heard, and I'm working with clients now who retire and then they injure themselves or they fall ill or their life circumstance changes and they have to look after an aged spouse or a hurt spouse. And so all of a sudden, all these plans that we had for later don't manifest. And so what that does is it creates really this sense of urgency, which is don't wait, which is what are you waiting for? And if the thing you're waiting for is retirement or some kind of a perception of when I have more money or when I have more time or when I have the plan baked or when I have the man of my dreams or whatever that it might not come. So I joke and say I've got 1,902 Mondays. I might not live to see this podcast aired, right? So do the things you want to do, right? And so grab onto it now.
Okay, so you mentioned this other piece of studying. You studied positive psychology.
Yes.
I want to talk to you about that. What is positive psychology? And what are some practices that you would suggest to the listeners to live more of a positive life? Because my thing is this, the saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. If you are 55 years old and you're stuck in this scarcity, victim blaming mentality, I'll land a plane on this point. It's hard to manifest good about you if you feel bad about you, right? So how do you get to that point? 55 years of just negative thinking.
Yeah. Okay. So many good things there. Okay. So if I start from your first question about what is positive psychology and how does this relate to anything we're talking about? Positive psychology is the scientific study of what makes life worth living. It's the study of the good stuff, the stuff that makes us thrive, the stuff that makes us flourish. And so it's about individuals, it's about organizations, it's about any kind of community or culture where it's looking at the best of us. And again, the things that activate us and using our strengths, achievement, the things that light us up. And so for the old dog, new tricks thing, I also struggle. And, for many years as a coach, I wouldn't be able to do the work I do if I didn't believe that people actually could implement change and transform. I'm going to be honest, it's a lot easier with some people than others. But what I see daily, and I mean this daily, through the work that I love to do, which is getting up and getting people woken up to the fact that this is temporary, is that it often turns a little light switch on and it creates, I'm not trying to create fear. I'm trying to create that sort of little jolt of awareness. And where we apply positive psychology in this and where I think we can teach old dogs lots of new tricks is that I think a framework helps. And so conveniently, I've developed one for us, which is this idea that, most of us are clamoring to live longer. And that would be great as long as the quality of our life is great. And so let's maybe take the emphasis off the length of our life. And I look at it as let's focus on the width and the depth. And so if you think about the width of your life, you can expand the width of it with all the stuff you fit in. And this has to do with, it's called the hedonic side of well-being. And it's the pleasure and the fun and the experiences and the things that just light you up. These are the trips. These are the meals out. These are the fun times. These are the date nights. These are the activities and hobbies and lots of the fun things that just are all about pleasure and joy. And most of us didn't experience a lot of width during COVID, right? Because we had to stay at home and we kind of narrowed our lives. So there's the widening. And I'll tell you, any old dog can all of a sudden stop and wake up and go, wait a sec. I used to love playing the trombone. Why did I stop playing the trombone? Pick up the frickin' trombone again or order one from Amazon. They're cheap. And even if it's not cheap, maybe it's worth it for you to do anyway. And so we can widen our lives by picking up some of those things that we know really just give us that extra zest. So that's the widening. We can come back to that if you want, because I love talking about that all day long. And then the deepening aspect, back to positive psychology, that's called the eudaimonic dimension of well-being. And that I liken to adding meaning to our lives. So it's a little bit different than the fun and the pizzazz and the froth and the fizz of the widening vitality. This is about connecting to other people and feeling like you have a good connection. It's about maybe connecting in a spiritual way to something bigger than yourself. It's about more character traits like being kind and giving and expressing gratitude and finding that what is the purpose of my life? Am I doing something that actually feels like there's meaning to it? Well, however big or small. I'm not here to judge size. It doesn't matter. And so when you combine both of those things together, that creates a recipe for a life well lived. And that creates a recipe where we can be what I call astonishingly alive rather than perhaps in the dead zone, which is where maybe we aren't feeling like we've had a lot of fun times lately, or we are feeling like life is kind of hollow and empty and just like a lot of Netflix and maybe not a lot of depth. So the framework, I think that we can teach old dogs new tricks all day long when we look at it through that framework.
Very relatable. Very, very relatable. It's kind of like doing the things that make you feel like you, right? Doing the things that make you feel like you. And at the same breath, it's like, and I've realized this about myself, sometimes being you is expensive. So it costs you a lot. So you have to do this in order for you to feel like yourself. And when you hit that point, it's like, now I get it. Because there was a time period where I felt like I was in a rut. I definitely felt like I wasn't myself. And that was a time period where I wasn't training and working out. Prior to the pandemic, I was a full-time personal trainer. Pandemic came, switched into podcasting full-time, dabble and other things, but I stopped prioritizing my health and it started to show. So it's so rewarding now because now I'm in depth with the podcast, but I recently sparked this back up, a couple months back. Now I'm looking at myself on camera. I'm like, yeah, I see it. Because when I go back and I look at some of my old recordings, it's like, oh, I could see it now. Right. So it's kind of like examining yourself, right? Understanding what makes you tick, what gives you that edge. And there's this book I read. I forgot I don't know if it was it wasn't The Secret. The Secret was I think it was The Secret, but they reference living on your edge. And you know what that is, right? So living on the edge for me, maybe 8 months ago, was cold calls, because that was like a fear that I felt was like chaining and pinning me down. Till I got over it, and I'm like, yo, that was so easy, Jodi. How did I block myself like that? But I'll end on the point on I just think, to sum it up, it's examining yourself, understanding what makes you feel like you. It's so relatable because a lot of people struggle with that.
Oh, you are speaking my language. I love the idea about the way you're referring it to what makes you you. I liken it to what makes you feel alive. I think we're talking about the same thing, different words, right? And so your example is a beautiful one of you fell off the wagon about being active. And that sounds like it's probably a combo I hear of widening your life with vitality. So and also deepening it because it makes you feel probably more confident, and a bunch of things that are related to both wider and deeper, but not literally wider on the screen, obviously narrower on the screen visually. But your point is fascinating about diagnosing. So I look at it like, I call it diagnosing the dead zones. And so I look at it like, first, like, let's identify where you feel like maybe you have flatlined in life. And only we individually, like, what's different for you, like where you flatlined isn't for me, which is different from our next door neighbor, right? So for you at one point, it was you left your health kind of, that was a particularly flattening area. For some people, it's their social life, right? Hey, I miss some of my friends, I miss my buddies. Or for some, it's love life. Or for some, it's the career side of things, right? Like, it's just not doing it for me anymore and something's missing. We have all sorts of domains in life. It could be our fun and recreation. It could be the environment around us, feeling like we really need to spruce things up around here. The list goes on. And the key, though, is identifying where is it that you feel like something's missing, or something does feel really quite dead. And that's just your opportunity to be honest. Like, let's just kill this death metaphor. Like, that's where you take the AED or you get CPR and you bring that part of your life back to life, because it really is never too late. So just like for you, you got back on the fitness wagon, or like the client I referred to, he picked up the trombone again, or like the client I just worked with this morning, she recommitted to being on a board for a nonprofit because it made her feel like she was connecting in some way to a purpose. And we have the ability to plug that right back in again to an energy source. So I think identifying where are things kind of flat is a start. And I'll just be super honest, Yahavy, like, I'd be remiss as a positive psychology practitioner if I dwelled only on the dead zones. There is huge merit also to identifying where your life is already pretty freaking fabulous, because that's a clue to, well, hey, if there's a lot of life there, well, what if you just did more of that? Now, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but there could be a thing where, hey, I'm thinking about a gentleman that he recently got onto this hobby of cooking. And he's like, I just get into flow. When you're swept up in flow, that state of like complete in the zone, you're challenged, but you're having fun. And he realized that cooking for him was just this life source. And so, well, how often are you doing it? He's like, I'm not really making a lot of time, but like, it's, once a month I make this amazing recipe. And it was, well, what would happen if you did it a little more often? Like, what would happen if, rather than once or twice a month, what if you built it in and made the time maybe a couple times a week? And these are simple adjustments in life, which I actually love. It's not rocket science. It's about identifying if something lights you up, how do you do more of it? How do you schedule it in to do more of it? And so he now is doing this thing where once a weekend and then once during the week, he's got like some kind of like saffron extravaganza coming up in a couple weekends. Like, he's living for this. And he is now showing up in the rest of his life with so much more life and energy. And just because, why? Because he's tapped into something that really makes him feel fantastic. So it can be, quite frankly, that simple. Diagnose the dead zones and fix the areas where you're kind of flatlined, and perk up even more the areas where you already feel alive.
It's like being present, right? You have to call on yourself to, be more present. I think it was Mel Robbins I got this from. She has this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 thing where it's like, and I've practiced it so many times, and I would say it works because it brings me consciously to this point of, okay, Yahavy, you're here, right? You're not just listening to respond, you're actively listening. I'm mentally going into this new freaking world in my mind, right? And I'm showing up the way I'm supposed to because I'm calling on myself to be present. And I feel like, I think, and I'm definitely off record now for sure, but I know this for a fact because I fell in this at one point in time, especially during the pandemic. And this is why I talk about it a lot. These last 2 years, it's been real eye-opening. A lot of people ended up on autopilot, right? They got accustomed to, bad habits, bad routines. And that's where, I mentioned with the whole fitness thing, because I was working remotely. I was here at the desk. I'm not accustomed to this. This wasn't my thing, right? I'm an active person, but it was easy to fall into those bad habits. And you talk about regrets. I think, I can't even say I think, but I know for sure I know for sure the last 2 years, outside looking in, you look at the world, a lot of change has happened. A lot of people thought about, these aha moments, but they didn't act on it, right? And you talked about this earlier, and I want to swing to
Yeah.
regret because, whoo, Jodi, I just have to take a deep breath on that. But I think for me, it's like I've realized this. Too much regret could also put you on autopilot. Too much regret
Mhm.
could really chain you down. So I want to ask,
Mm.
what are some suggestions to getting over that and accepting what is? Because I've learned that there's also silver lining in failure, right? I could
Yeah.
live with this. One thing I'm comfortable with is if I'm making 500 cold calls and no one buys, cool. I'm fine with that. But if I was hesitant and I didn't make any calls, that eats me alive because now I'm
Oh,
living with
yeah.
the I don't know. Like,
Huh.
bro, if I would have just did that call. And that's in the other part, and I'll end on this point because it's like it is based on a true story that's happened to me. And it's like I got to this point of I'm a very intuitive person, but at that time I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust
Mm.
myself because I wasn't doing the things that made me feel like me. So it's like, man, and I have this quote legit right here on my wall on a decal. This quote is self-trust is the first secret of success. If you could trust yourself, I strongly believe you will be successful. But there was no trust there, which put me on autopilot, put me in frozen. And it is relatable because there are a lot of people that, how do you get that trust back and how do you move past resentment? I know I said a whole bunch, but I had to get all that
So
out.
good. Oh, so good. Thank you for sharing, by the way. And you hit on something about regret that I think is so powerful, which is that we usually regret things we didn't do rather than the things we did do. So your example of the cold calling, it's one thing to just sort of flounder, be like, I tried and it didn't work. Well, then at least you can probably rationalize through that. But research consistently shows that when we didn't make the calls or we didn't write the book we've been longing to write, or we didn't go for that promotion that we really wanted, or that we didn't ask her out, or that we didn't, all the things that we would love to do that we didn't do, psychologically, we ruminate. And we do the thing where we toil and wonder what could have happened. And then we beat ourselves up why we didn't do it. And then we fantasize about the life we could have been living right now if we'd only had the guts or the balls or the whatever. And so we just torture the heck out of ourselves. And so my counsel and what I really encourage groups and clients to do is to do an exercise where we stop and we do. I mean, it's a classic deathbed regrets exercise, right? Where you imagine if you were on your deathbed now, and sometimes I get super visual with it, and sometimes I just keep it light and fluffy, like right now. But it's that if you were gonna just about kick the bucket right about now, what would be something that you would wish, oh, I wish that I did it. And so that it gets written down on a list. And that becomes a thing where it's a potential regret in the making. And if you do nothing today to change that, well, then, oh, that sucks, right? You might die and then you might end up feeling, that feeling of the pang of regret at the end. Or you look at that thing on the list. And can I just be nosy and ask you, like, what would an example be today for you of something that you want to do that you haven't done that might turn into a regret for you if you were on your deathbed? What's an example of one thing? It could be minor, major.
Probably writing a movie. Probably writing a movie.
Ooh.
Probably writing a movie for sure. For sure.
Oh,
Either writing a movie or acting. Two
okay.
hand in hand. Yeah, for sure.
By the way, I love how you just went from like thinking about it and then you said probably and then you said for sure. Like the more you articulated it and said it, you're like, gosh darn it. Okay. So writing a movie and or acting. What this means is you have it written down and now you've said it, you've put it out there. Now we all know. And now you're accountable. But anyways, aside from that, you get to go, well, if I was ailing on my deathbed, waiting for my next morphine shot, I'd wish I had done that. Or today you can take an action. Or you can commit to something where you're actually taking a purposeful next step. And so as an example, what is one thing you might want to do to move this writing the movie or acting forward?
I would say really start really, really write
Uh,
and express that. and be vocal with it. I've learned working in silence doesn't benefit me. When I speak out loud, someone might actually hear my idea and like, hey, I could help. So I just think, network, talk about it more, speak it into existence, but also behind the scenes, actually write and apply what that film looks like to me.
Okay. Well, just for fun, because we're talking now, what would be something that you could do within, I would say, the next week that you could even like send to me, and you could even send it, but I won't open it, or you could send it to me and I'll sign an NDA and I'll never share it with anybody. But what would be something you could do in a week?
In terms of writing,
Yep.
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good with writing. No, I probably would make a short film. I have a background in comedy, but for me, I like to say I specialize in personality,
Ooh,
but I have this side of me that I really would like to showcase on film, like the dark side of being like a villain,
villain.
antagonist, just someone that just like I want to be. My thing is this, Jody. I'm glad you asked this question. All right, so I want to be one of those actors where it's like I'm so good at my role that you hate me in real life. Like we all have that.
I
I want to
love
be like,
people like you.
yeah, I want to be like that. Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
That's the
Okay.
goal.
You are coming alive. Okay. This is the part that I love, is that you're already alive doing your podcast. It's so clear listening to you. It's so clear you have this is part of what you're meant to do. But hearing you talk about this dream you have, dream/goal, however you want to see it, you are undeniably alive talking about it. Like there's something in you that's just like exploding. It's beautiful to watch, beautiful to see. And so this is an example to me of, man, your life just needs to be full of more of this, because how, like, to know that you have this ability to light yourself up and to not light that light. Wow. Like shame on all of us for when we know that something is big for us. Like I want you doing this daily. I want to have it like a morning check-in call where every morning we check in on your progress. Don't worry, I won't micromanage you, but you get the idea.
But it's something. It's so interesting that we're on the topic. I guess we could talk about it now. But I was having this conversation with myself earlier when I was driving. I love talking to myself. My aunt used to tell me as a kid, it's crazy to talk to yourself. I'm like, oh, it's crazy if you don't, right? There's no one that we talk to more than ourselves. We talk to ourselves in the head or
Yes.
outside verbally. But my thing was this. I mean, I remember there was an opportunity that I walked away from because I wanted to pursue acting at that particular time, but it didn't work out necessarily in that moment. But I've also learned, and this is, after, me learning what I needed to learn from that particular experience. Some things don't happen in the moment. Delayed doesn't mean denied. That's like one of my biggest takeaways. Delayed doesn't mean denied. Yeah, you want to do that, but me taking a step back, now I see the big picture of not only can I act, but I could actually write and be an actor in what I wrote. And I don't know, like it started to make sense to me. Like I feel like in order for me to, I don't know, when I'm silent, Jody, like when I get silent, if I'm not talking, that's when I'm making the most noise. That's how I feel. Like sometimes the best thing for me to do is nothing at all. Like absolutely nothing. I give myself, of course, like not every day I'm going to do absolutely nothing. That's not the case. But like I would block off a time, just deep breaths, write out some things, write out some deadlines. What's important to me? My gratitude journal. That's an everyday thing. Like my gratitude journal is, got this journal. What do I love? What do I love to do? Who can I serve? What am I grateful for? Like, so it's an everyday routine of just a rewired mind. I feel refreshed. I feel rejuvenated, which is great. It keeps me in alignment with my assignment. But I also have learned this, and I guess this is where this is what I ask you. But my passion has changed. Like it's changed. It's interesting because when I launched this podcast, I had no idea I was going to do over 100 episodes. I didn't know I was going to meet 100 plus business professionals from across the world. I didn't have that idea in that particular moment. I just followed and trusted myself in that moment. And I seen what it's given me. And it was never about likes, views, and downloads. None of that, all of that. I've learned so much more about myself in the experience. And I'm like, man, my goals has changed. And you mentioned something about, yeah, now I could hold you accountable, right? I know you were joking, but it's like, I'm just so spontaneous,
Mm.
Jodi, where it's like my goals change. And when people,
Yes.
so that's why it's like when I move in silence is a little better, but
Yeah.
from the outside looking in, oh yeah, you had you had a great idea to do this. How come you didn't commit to it? Ah, my heart's not in it. Right. And like,
Oh,
if
yeah.
my heart's not in it, Jodi, like it's just not happening.
Oh,
The reason why I do this podcast is because number one, it's never been about me. It's always been about the stories. It's always been about the stories because I could learn from everyone's story. Everyone could learn from your story. But what I love the most about what I do, and I'll just give it back to you here, is the silver lining in everyone's story. If you think you like for some reason that, oh, they have to have a CFO or a speaker, investor in front of their name in order for them to give it good advice,
Mm.
tell you, your blessings will come from the people that you least expect. And I've had people tell me some incredible things. I'm like, wait a minute, wait, that came from you? So it's
Wow.
like you never know, like you really never know who that message is going to come from.
Yeah.
And people don't forget how you make them feel. So it's kind of like that piece too. I've been that for people. People have told me that, and people have done that for me. So it's like this. It's what's the Murphy law? Like it's just
Yeah.
how the way the law works.
Yeah. Yeah. You're such an inspiration. You're something you said now, and it echoes what you said earlier in our conversation. I think it's an important point around how our passions change and how I think we have to give ourselves permission for that. So
Right.
I am always aware of where my message might go astray. And I might I don't want to say confuse people, but that I talk about living wider and living deeper and not waiting and doing it and not getting on your deathbed and thinking, that doesn't mean that we have to maniacally or obsessively pick the thing and finish it if it means, but what if it's not giving us joy anymore? Right. So, what if, like, I met with a client this morning who we identified his top strength is perseverance. And sometimes he admitted that he is so perseverant, if you like to say the word that way, that doesn't give up on it even when the moment has passed. And so I'm very aware that we need to make room for evolution. We need to make room for the fact that that hobby that maybe dude with the trombones, like, you know what? I played it for a few months and it was great. And now I'm just not feeling the love anymore. And so put the trombone down. Like it's okay. And that as long as you're okay with it. And so the difference is ultimately in how do you feel about it at the end of the day? So, for example, if there are projects that you have that are on your mind and they kind of excite you and they may make you a little bit nervous and they bring up lots of feelings and thoughts, there's a big difference between shelving them and, putting them aside or procrastinating them when there's still the energy of, but I really want this. I'm just scared. And if I was on my deathbed, I would feel like a bag of dirt that I didn't do it. That's very different than, it's kind of funny. I used to really want to act and I did it a little bit, but for some reason, once I dabbled in it, the sizzle fizzled. And I'm kind of cool that if I was on my deathbed, I'd be like, yeah, I gave it a try. High five to me. But I moved on because I wanted something different. And so I think that paying attention to where your interests do evolve, I think is really interesting. And that it could be maybe a no for now. Like here's the interest also in, say, entrepreneurs, or many of us have lots of ideas and we want to do lots of different things, but we have to pick. Like life's short. We can't do all 9,000 things we long to do, unfortunately. And so there is always a little bit of a reshuffling of my priorities. What would be really cool for you now? And it might mean that the acting all of a sudden now is maybe higher up on your list than writing the cool movie. But then that might shift again. And so that's the work, I think, of being human. And that's the work we actually do have to put time and energy into, is stopping every now and then and doing the work of, how am I doing? Where are the dead zones? Where are the bright spots? And where are my priorities? Like, am I actually doing the stuff that I want to do that makes me feel proud, that makes me feel amazing? Oh, okay. I just need to tweak those things. Cool. I'm back on track. And I like how you said, I'm going to use these words always, in alignment with my assignment. That's my
Yeah.
favorite takeaway.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. So it's also like, you know, you my thing is this, like I've learned to welcome failure, right? Doesn't mean I'm out here manifesting failure. Yeah, I want to fail today. No. But I've learned to welcome it, like the silver lining in failure, what I could learn from it. I feel personally, man, you better hope I succeed because there's just something about failure. I come back from a failure, I'm coming 10 times better. Like I'm more sharp. I know, like it's who did I interview recently? Amy Shrugg's media coach. Big shout outs to her. She was recently on a podcast, and she was talking about like just studying yourself on film, for example. And like I was really intrigued by that because I've done so much podcast interviews. Went back and looked at some of my old recordings. I'm like, man, nah, okay. I could see how I could do this better. I know how I could be better, right? So it's accepting your shortcomings, not beating yourself up, but using that to your advantage. Like my thing is this, I have to use this to my advantage. If I don't use failures to my advantage, how do I expect to get better? It's like the sports analogy of baseball, basketball, whatever sport. They study film, right? You win or lose, you're looking at the film, right? You're studying yourself. Where were your shortcomings? How were you successful? So for me, it's like it goes back to the saying, right? Success leaves clues. How was I always successful, Jodi? It made me really think. Oh yeah, I was doing that. Oh, I was in the service industry. What was I doing? I was solving problems. How? I was a personal trainer, right? So there was also, of course, and I talked about this earlier, right? Being present,
Yeah.
but showing respect to my past, whether it was like positive or negative, but using that as a what's the word, like a not a stepping stool, but something to kind of like re-spark the fire, right? To all right, so if I'm at a point where I feel like I'm scribbling, I can't even think straight.
Yeah.
This literally happened to me a couple months back. So I'll tell you what happened to me. So
Yeah.
there was a point where I don't know, mentally I was just scrambled. And I'm like, wait a minute. You know what they're saying? Success leaves clues. Let me backtrack. What have I done? So I made this timeline. I have my whiteboard right here. So I wrote this timeline from high school, graduated high school back in 2010. Oh boy, I can't believe it's 2010. Oh my gosh. So I graduated high school back in 2010. Then I vividly wrote down some big key moments from 2010 to 2022.
Ooh.
What are some big things that I've done? Where have I seen the most success, whether it's personal, professional? And what has been the biggest change, right? 2019, I became a dad. My daughter's 3 years old now. So it's just like, so once I see, Jodi, once I started to see my life on paper or on a board, it started to make sense. So this is prior to, I believe this was maybe prior to me reaching out, inviting you onto the show. I strongly believe all of this is connected. So I'm a firm believer. There's a reason why we met and connected. So I want to bring it back to 4,000 Mondays.
Yeah.
When you look at your past,
Yeah.
and you living in the now, I don't know. My thing with that was it gave me so much clarity. I'm like, bro, why are you beating yourself up? You didn't like. I'm not trust. Like Jodi, I'm from Southside Jamaica, Queens. I'm not supposed to be here, right? So I'm having these conversations with, not to speak about you in third person. I'm talking to Jodi Wellman, right? TEDx speaker, coach, executive, right? But I come from humble beginnings. I come from the hood, right? But it's like I look at this and I'm like, wait a minute, is this survival skill? I'm like, no. I gotta celebrate me a little bit more. I don't show myself enough grace. So while I was looking at this timeline, I kind of see where I was dropping the ball. I don't know why I felt the need to share that, but I don't know. It was important to me, and I see how that connects.
Oh, it does beautifully. I love this story. And so by doing this timeline, it sounds like it made you feel proud. And you could see this like the arc of a story of how like
gratitude, high gratitude, and flow. Flow is the word choice, I would say. Like I felt more
beautiful.
like flow.
Yeah. And it sounds like that, and even the visual part of it also helped ignite more confidence, more excitement about what else could be next in the next whiteboard. If you continue the whiteboard around your room, like what's next in life?
It just made me feel, well, I'd say definitely confident, yes. Flow, yes. But it also gave me this reality check of like, okay,
Mm.
I could tell you what year I really dropped the ball. I could tell you what year
Mm.
things went south, right? That was a really bad year. And it kind of goes back to this thing I've been saying, like, okay, if you have a bad day, you have a bad day, but you can't let a bad day be a bad week. Then that bad week turns into a month, then it's a year. So it's just like, man, I could tell you this one particular year was all victim blaming.
Mm.
And the following year was just a whole bunch of resentment because I was victim blaming. So it was just so interesting
Yeah.
how, like, when you write it down, it's like you're taking yourself outside of yourself and you're looking at it like, wait a minute, why
Yeah.
am I doing that? Right? Like,
Oh,
man,
beautiful.
if I had a time machine, if I had a time machine.
Wouldn't life be different? Yeah. But you're thinking, the exercise you did is so fabulous. And you know what it reminds me of? There's this thing that they do. Some therapists do it. A lot of people do it when they're near the end of their life. So in hospice or when they're very senior. And it's it's called a life review. And it is where you chronicle, here's my story. And it's not literally, day one, born in, it's about the highlights, it's about the lowlights. Because let's be honest, like the highs in life are high because we juxtapose them against the lows. And so I think a misnomer about positive psychology is that it's all about the silver linings and the kittens and the rainbows. And like, no, like here, case in point, like I'm the one walking around buddying up with the Grim Reaper because like that's the thing that's going to help us seize the freaking day, right? It's the fact that you look at your story and you say, I saw that year was victim and then that year was resentment. And there was a flavor there that I do not want to taste again. And that makes all the years, couching those years and including, it sounds like this year for you, so much sweeter. Or if you don't like sweets, so much more savory, like a potato chip. And so the life review is essentially kind of a version of what you've done. And I actually encourage people to sometimes go deeper with what are the storylines? What's the arc? Let's not get obsessed with the past, but let's use it to inform what we want for the next whiteboard on the wall. And what do you want that? What would that, like, what would delight you in 10 years from now to look back and see some of the ups and downs? Because obviously we're not going to program and plan for the downs. We're just going to be mentally resilient and ready for them. But you know what? What do you want the ups to be? And so that's the cool part, I think, of what you've done is you put things in perspective. And when we have however many Mondays left, how do you want the remaining weeks to be? What will be neat for you to fit in that time?
And this was, wrapping this up, because it's like, man, I get so, like, first off, Jodi, I want to say thank you for coming on the podcast today. But this was probably like, it didn't even feel like an interview, right? Real deep conversation. I think conversation is an understatement. But you got me, like, I don't know. I just feel so, I can't even, I'm trying to, like, if I could describe the way I'm feeling with one word, it's just, it's very hard to describe, but maybe there isn't a word for it yet. But for me, it's like, man, I feel so clarity. Yeah, one good. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just feel like, yeah. Like, and I told you this right before we recorded. I'm like, yo, Jodi, like, I'm telling you, this is gonna be good. Let me hit record right now, right? But it's like, boom, here we are, 47 minutes gone already. I'm like, man, that's it, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, man, what we have 160, I think it's 168 hours in a week.
I think that sounds right.
And it's just like like really being intentional, right? So when I look at my time blocks, and I'm very big on my time management now versus from way back when, to spend this time with you today, have this in-depth conversation, well needed for me spiritually. Hopefully those that are either watching or listening, you either, take this with a grain of salt. I always say what good is information if we don't apply it. But there is a lot of practices said today that could be applied. And I feel like this is one of those podcast interviews for sure. 100%. You need to listen to more than one time. 100%. Because you might hear something a little different the second time around.
Yeah, I'll be listening to it. I want more nuggets that came out of your face. Like there's so many things that are you have a nice way of weaving it together. And something in particular about like our 47 minutes together. I just think of like he said, the time blocks, like that's all that our lives are. And so I talk
Yeah.
about 4,000 Mondays and however many days you have. We have the potential to craft so many chunks of our time. And so it's literally, sometimes it's even like 5 minutes at a time. And so why not fill that next 5 minutes of your life? Why not fill the next 47 minutes of your life with something that might give you a shot at feeling more alive, more joyful? Maybe it's widening with vitality, go pop some popcorn. Maybe it's more depth, like go phone an old friend. But rather than just getting swept up in the current of life. And the current is going to happen and the current's going to take us places. And sometimes they'll be amazing and sometimes they'll be just total trash. But generally, when if we stop and say, wait a sec, I'm in the boat. I can steer a little bit here and say, wait, what do I want my next 30 minutes of life to be like? And, unless you are up next to do a presentation at work or whatever you have going on, you have more control. And so let's grab it. Let's grab it and craft the small things and also do the big things because we don't want to wait.
We don't have to wait neither. Jodi, please, before we wrap up, where can everyone follow you and keep up with you and be in contact?
Well, thank you for asking. I can be found at 4000mondays.com.
4000mondays.com. All right. With that being said, I want to thank you for streaming, watching, however you're consuming this content. This is the St. Clair Speak Show. I'll catch you in the next episode.